the never-ending story? Many nerds of my generation, myself included, had a favorite used bookstore they loved to while the time away in. And if you were really lucky, they'd be run by an eccentric old guy with receding hair and a bushy mustache. By the time I found mine, it was a couple of years after my best friend showed me Calvin and Hobbes and got me into reading in the first place. And when he and I moved on to books like The Hobbit, I was absolutely drawn into the realm of fantasy. And my head was swimming in Middle-earth, Narnia, gnomes, and my very favorite was a series of books called The Enchanted World by Time Life Books. They're fairly rare and largely forgotten, but if you can ever get your hands on them, it's quite worth it, because they are an absolute treasure. Wizards and witches, fairies and elves, fabled lands, the fall of Camelot, legends of valor. I came to know all about dragons, wizards, unicorns, monsters. I also came to know the names and deeds of great heroes. Cuchulainn, the Hound of Ulster, Sigurd, Beowulf, the Knights of the Round Table. At the time, my dad and I moved to a new city, and I had to leave my comfortable old used bookstore behind. There were none in this new area, and my dad knew how much it meant to me, and in 1992, without the aid of internet, he found me one about an hour's drive away. So, we set out together on our quest, just father and son, and about 4 cities and 5 mountains away, there it was, the very promisingly named Camelot Books. And there he was. And I swear, this guy was just absolutely built in a factory for eccentric old bookstore owners. We had the balding hair, check. The plump belly, check. The bushy mustache, check. And the eccentricity, oh, double check. I remember going up to him and asking, "Do you have any books on Cuchulainn?" And he kind of smiled at me knowingly and he said, "Ah, you mean Huhuliolan?" And I thought, "No, I mean Cuchulainn." But I just kind of smiled and nodded. He showed me around for a bit and I asked him, fascinated, "What is the oldest book you've got?" And his face didn't really change much, but in a subtle way, he kind of lit up. He waved me over and he showed me a really old, really huge tome of a book. I think it was a copy of the Bible, and he said it was about 120 years old. "Here, take a look at this," he said, and he lightly tapped the cover. The book was so old that it wasn't made and printed in a modern conventional sense. The cover and binding were actually made out of wood. It was hand-carved and beautifully made. It wasn't mass-produced and meant for everyone. It was made to be unique and special. And whether I realized it at the time or not, it taught me a lesson about quality versus quantity. Now, as we were doing this, there was something about his excitement that made me excited. There was something about the reverence that he was showing to this book that was just infectious. There was something special about a situation where a middle-aged man and a 12-year-old boy, 2 people who usually don't have anything in common, can actually form a bond over a book more than a century old. As you can imagine, an ancient Bible was a little bit out of my price range, but he showed me this, a book I bought and I've treasured ever since. And it doesn't have a hand-carved wooden binding, and the spine is a little bit beat up, but if I keep taking care of it for about another 20 more years, then it will become over a century old. King Arthur and His Knights, a condensed and abridged version of the book Le Mort d'Arthur, or The Death of Arthur, written by Sir Thomas Malory in the 15th century, and is a compendium of stories detailing the adventures of King Arthur and his knights of the Round Table. This is how I learned all about Sir Lancelot du Lac, Sir Balin le Savage, Sir Gareth, Sir Tristram, and many others. Coincidentally, at around the same time, Capcom had made the perfect beat-em-up for me. Knights of the Round, made in 1991, is an arcade side-scrolling beat-em-up which cobbles together loose elements and themes of the classic Arthurian legend. And to me, this game is just absolutely hidden treasure. You can take control of one of 3 fighters, the axe-wielding Sir Percival, the flower of all knighthood Sir Lancelot with curved scimitar, and finally King Arthur, the once and future king of all Britons, hefting the great broadsword Excalibur, whose quest began when he pulled it aloft from the stone. Even though the opening cinematic seems to clearly show him putting it in the stone. The story begins in the days of yore, when a younger Arthur, training himself to be a great knight, pulls the sword from the stone and begins to search the land for warriors worthy to fight at his side, and worthy quests by which to prove their valor. The realm is embattled and plagued by petty kings and emperors who would carve up the land and resources for their own avaricious designs. Arthur must put an end to their reign of terror and embark on the noblest quest of all, the search for the Holy Grail. Arthur meets the powerful Sir Percival and the gallant Sir Lancelot, who seek a worthy king to serve. But their quest actually begins under the guiding hand of another familiar figure of Arthurian legend, the wizard Merlin, who begins, "Only the Holy Grail can release this world from attain the chaos. You should be able to find it, because you are able to sacred sword. Help each other and find it, brave men. Now if you'll excuse me, I'm off to my English grammar and elocution lessons at Oxford." The game is a pretty traditional beat-em-up, in the same vein as many others that Capcom was perfecting around the same time, like Final Fight or the King of Dragons. You play as one of 3 protagonist archetypes, who slash their way through waves of different types of enemies and bosses, on the way to the final confrontation with the last powerful boss. You can choose Lancelot, the quickest character but also the lowest on physical power, or Percival, whose thick axe swings deal the most damage, though being predictably the slowest, or King Arthur, the balanced character who walks the line between strength and speed. While each character plays similarly, they each have their own unique abilities and playstyle. Lancelot has a backhand slash, and he's the only character to have a jump kick attack, and can take multiple swings in the air. King Arthur has a mighty overhead chop, and can only swing his sword once after a jump, but at any point he wants to during that jump. Percival is the only character who can dash forward and cancel it into a fierce axe swing, but his jumping attack only hits at the end of his jump. The medieval setting lends itself to many interesting aspects of gameplay. The world is populated by sword-swinging soldiers, magic users, burly knights in full armor, even an Eastern warrior from samurai Japan, and of course, my most hated enemy type,
Skywalker.
Yes, Skywalker. Actually, the Skywalkers are extremely annoying, because they often get into a rhythm where you can't land a combo because they get knocked down with just one hit, making you wait to kill them off. Another fun aspect of gameplay that gives diversity to the combat is the ability to mount a horse and fight from horseback. You can even steal and mount a horse you've knocked a boss character off of. And perhaps the key innovation, and one of the simplest and satisfying aspects of the game, is the leveling up system. As your character progresses in his quest and improves his skills, the changes are reflected as his sprite changes. The character's weaponry improves, their armor becomes more ornate and polished. It motivates you as a player, and lets you feel like you've gone on a journey with your character, a journey that changed you, matured you. This is an absolute treasure of a game, a love letter to Arthurian legend, and a well-done example of the simple and fun beat-em-up genre. And looking back on this game, many who knew it would say the same. Criticism seems to be leveled at its repetitive gameplay and the small number of playable characters. Now in the world of 2015, those are pretty indisputable points and technically quite true, where any look at a more recent beat-em-up will be bound to show many different character types, or many different and interesting options for fighting. The problem with that kind of review, which mirrors the conundrum of going into the used bookstore, is that when you're surrounded by so much treasure, it's easy to miss everything. Being a good historian, a keeper of the past, it's important to understand not just how a piece stacks up in the modern era, but how it stacked up in its own era. And while Knights of the Round has a fond place in the hearts of those who knew it well of old, it doesn't seem to get the mainstream recognition of its contemporaries like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, The Simpsons arcade game, and Final Fight. Though actually, Knights of the Round really stood head and shoulders over them all in terms of innovations both conspicuous and subtle. In addition to the aforementioned horseback element to fighting, combat introduced a blocking and counter-attacking mechanic new to fighting games. And similar to Final Fight in the King of Dragons, Knights of the Round was one of the first beat-em-ups to pioneer the desperation move by pressing both jump and attack at the same time, which can take down all surrounding foes at the cost of some life. There were never before introduced unique items, like the magic to turn all foes into food, and the chess piece which summons the horse. And speaking of items, another innovation this game introduces is affecting items by striking them. Want to play fair? You could split up food and treasure by hitting it and sharing it with your fellow knights. You can even change items by striking them. I even love the sound effects of this game, from the jewelly twinkling of receiving treasure, to the clang of steel on steel of a contested swing, to the visceral sound of tearing into your enemy when your swing lands. At the end of your campaign, when you braved the strange land and ascended to the final throne of the enemy... Garibaldi?
Ah, Mr. Garibaldi! Mr. Garibaldi! Mr. Garibaldi!
Well, Emperor Garibaldi now. And what is it with the sci-fi references? When the evil Emperor is finally toppled, the noblest quest of all is at last completed. The Holy Grail is attained. Now, if you're a basic student of the Grail legend, you'll know that Arthur is kind of out of place and really doesn't belong in the main story, and would better be replaced with Sir Galahad or Sir Horse. But you know what's one of my favorite things about this game? I love all the characters leveling up and visible growth throughout the game, but I really like Percival's in particular. In the stories, he is portrayed as an ignorant and naive youth raised in forests away from civilized men. Simple and somewhat childishly gullible, it was that innocent quality and pure heart which helped him become worthy to glimpse the Grail. And at the beginning of the game, he looks very much the part of a country bumpkin with his chili bowl haircut and leather breeches. And by the end of this quest, his powerful body has become battle-tested. He now dons the armor of a true fighter, and his head is clean-shaven and he has grown a beard and bears the look of a mature warrior, a man grown with a heart warm and virtuous. This is a game which truly deserves its place in the sun. Fans of the Arthurian lore know that the tales of the valorous deeds of the Knights of the Round Table will never be forgotten. And if you are lucky enough to play it in the arcades, you know that you can never forget Knights of the Round. Come here. What's your favorite game?